Our story begins today in the office of Cornelius Fudge. The minister is in a state of panic after returning from Hogwarts. It was supposed to be a celebration, an example of international magical cooperation, yet, once again, Dumbledore had to ruin it. It was bad enough when he had been unable to prevent Sirius Black from escaping after the Ministry had been pursuing him for nearly a year. The Prophet had a field day with that one, yet somehow Dumbledore wasn't mentioned. It made Fudge think that Dumbledore could have just let Sirius go, just to embarrass him. Yes, that was the only way to explain Dumbledore's actions. You-know-who couldn't be back. Dumbledore must want to be minister, and this was a years-long ploy by him to discredit Fudge so he could assume power. Over the next few weeks, Fudge had several meetings about this as he wanted to put together investigations and audits into how Dumbledore was running Hogwarts, but he needed more. He needed to discredit Potter. If he could do that, then Dumbledore wouldn't have a leg to stand on. And how hard could that be? The boy was a Parseltongue and nobody really knew how he survived against you-know-who. There were plenty who believed that the boy only survived because of dark magic, that he was a threat to be the next Dark Lord. Throw in the fits he was having, and it wouldn't be hard to sell the public on him at least being an attention seeker, that he had become addicted to his own fame. At this point there was a knock on his door. Dolores Umbridge had entered his office. The two were just in a meeting where they were discussing the Potter problem. Fudge liked her. He knew where her loyalties lied, and they were with him. She would tell Fudge that she had a thought about Potter, that she was confused about why everyone was so sure that Cedric Diggory's death was an accident. How could they know that there was a problem with the portkey? Perhaps Potter had more to do with Diggory's death than originally thought, and it would cast doubt on the perfect boy who lived. In the coming weeks, Fudge would instruct the Prophet to not only begin to discredit Harry, but to question the death of Cedric Diggory, that they wanted to honor him by finding the truth and that the answers they were given were unsatisfactory, which would then lead to Fudge being able to proclaim that the Ministry would be investigating the questionable nature of Cedric's death, with his father Amos proclaiming he wanted the truth as well as he appeared to be standing with the Ministry. But then Dumbledore would speak out, saying that Voldemort was back, that he was responsible for Cedric's death, and that they needed to prepare for his future attacks. Naturally, Fudge would discredit him by saying he was trying to hide Potter and prevent people from learning the real truth of what happened at the Triwizard Tournament. For speaking out, Dumbledore would be demoted from being the chief warlock of the Wizengamot and voted out of the chairmanship of the International Confederation of Wizards. Fudge even wanted to remove his Order of Merlin first class, but Dumbledore didn't care. He only cared that he stayed on those silly chocolate frog cards, and Fudge would have thought about taking him off those too if he didn't realize how it would look for him to care about candy this much. When he realized nothing he could do would get Dumbledore to stop speaking out, Fudge had enough. He was going to bring Potter in, no matter what Dumbledore wanted, and at this point he was ready to send the Aurors. Shacklebolt would lead the charge. Fudge knew he had been doing great work searching for Sirius Black, but this was more important. Yet, unbeknownst to Fudge, Kingsley had already joined the Order of the Phoenix, and would let Dumbledore know that there was a warrant for Harry's arrest in connection with the murder of Cedric Diggory. Of course, Dumbledore would immediately act as he would appear at the Ministry in defense of Harry, but there was a problem. Harry wasn't at number 4. Kingsley hadn't brought him in yet, but because this story includes order, what can go wrong will go wrong. And this time, it would be that Umbridge would take the opportunity to send the Dementors to Little Whinging. Nobody would know this was happening until Harry had to cast a Patronus to save himself, because Mundungus fled after seeing the Dementors, leaving Mrs. Fig as the only one left to protect him. Only after Harry cast his Patronus would Kingsley find him and explain what Dumbledore's plan was at the Ministry, as they were trying to set Harry up for the murder of Cedric Diggory. Harry would obviously be shocked and furious, but after Kingsley would tell him Dumbledore's plan and that they could explain everything later, Harry would still of course be angry, but his desire for more information would outweigh that, and he would go with Kingsley. And back at the Ministry, Fudge may have been surprised by Dumbledore's sudden appearance, but he still had a trick up his sleeve. Potter wouldn't be facing a simple questioning anymore. he would be facing the full Wizengamot, as not only was Harry being brought in for the questioning of the murder of Cedric Diggory, but now also for his use of underage magic, so now he would be facing charges. There was one problem Fudge couldn't overcome with the trial, though. He still didn't have enough evidence to prove murder. The closest thing he had was that he claimed Harry had fled the scene and then used underage magic to fight against the Dementors who were trying to bring him in. But Dumbledore would be ready for this. Of course, there was no denying Harry's Patronus, but he would have Kingsley testify to the fact that he had not requested the Dementors to help arrest Harry. This would then cause chaos in the Wizengamot, as Dumbledore would suggest that perhaps the Ministry was no longer in full control of the Dementors, that they had joined Voldemort. This would cause quite the commotion, especially as Fudge was adamant in denying that Voldemort was back as he tried to take control of the situation again, that they were here because Harry had performed underage magic, and possibly murder. Harry would want to explode in anger. It was one thing for Fudge to deny Voldemort was back, to say that Harry was a liar, but a murderer? Something about it depressed Harry to his core. He knew what happened, and to think that people thought he could be responsible for Cedric's death. Cedric's memory was the only thing preventing him from shouting at Fudge, and probably getting sent to Azkaban. But Dumbledore was still in control of the situation. That Harry only performed the Patronus because of the danger, especially if the Dementors weren't supposed to be there. Something he was sure the Ministry would want to investigate, of course. And because of this, Dumbledore would then suggest that he show all the spells Harry had performed recently. Prior Incanto! The silver stag burst out of Harry's wand again, and then Lumos, and then the Expelliarmus spell that Harry had used against Voldemort in the graveyard, but this time Harry's parents didn't come out. And then it was the spells that Harry had used in the final trial for the Triwizard Tournament. Deletrius! Fudge would then try to argue that Potter could have deleted any spells that would incriminate him, or that he could have used the Expelliarmus spell to set some events in motion that would end in Cedric's death. This would lead to more talk of Voldemort again. However, this time Dumbledore would be setting up a trap for Fudge, that if he didn't believe anyone could have tampered with the portkey, then Cedric's death must have then been a result of something that happened in the Triwizard Tournament, as so many others had unfortunately died before him, and not anything that Harry could have done. And with no other evidence, Harry would be cleared of all charges, as he wouldn't be sent to Azkaban, or even expelled from Hogwarts. Of course, there were some who still voted to convict Harry, but that was just Fudge and his most loyal followers, including one who looked like a toad. The time had also come that Harry would have to leave Privet Drive for Grimmauld Place, but Dumbledore would not be the one bringing him there, nor would he talk to him once he was cleared. Arthur would be outside waiting for Harry and would immediately bring him to his godfather's home. Not much would change, though, at Grimmauld Place, as Harry would still speak in his dulcet tones about his frustrations, with him eventually learning of the Order of the Phoenix and then waging war against the home. And of course, the Ministry would continue to discredit Harry and Dumbledore, as Umbridge would still be given the defense against the dark arts post. Ugh. However, the change at Hogwarts would be in how Harry was treated by the student body. He was used to being the center of rumors, even when they involved him committing murder, but this was different, as they were thinking of him not just murdering because he believed in the dark arts, but just for attention. This would hit hardest for Harry with Cho, as whatever part of her that may have liked him seemed wary of him now. It wasn't just that he was claiming Voldemort was back and he nearly got expelled. It was that the explanation was his alibi for not having killed Cedric. And Harry's anger, always on the surface, would explode on people even more. House points being taken from Gryffindor, earning him detentions with Umbridge, and getting him banned from playing Quidditch as he couldn't imagine his life getting worse. Yet, there would still be hope. Hermione would bring up the idea of Harry teaching defense against the dark arts, as Dumbledore's army would rise again, though this time without Cho Chang and Marietta Edgecombe, who would be revealed as a sneak another day. And with no Marietta to snitch to Umbridge, she and the Inquisitorial Squad would never be able to catch Harry and the other students in the act. so Dumbledore would not be removed as headmaster, though Umbridge would continue to create new ministry decrees to give herself more power over him. This would culminate in her sacking Hagrid in the middle of the night, at a time when she knew Dumbledore was preoccupied with other matters, as she would bring several Aurors with her as Hagrid would have to flee into the mountains, as Professor McGonagall would still be stunned and have to go to St. Mungo's. Dumbledore would of course try to make his way down when he heard Hagrid's shouts, but would not be able to protect McGonagall, as he would realize that this was Umbridge trying to bait him, so that they could arrest him for treason, and leaving Harry with Professor Snape as the only Order member at Hogwarts. And then, during his History of Magic exam, Harry would get a vision of Sirius being tortured by Voldemort, of him going after whatever was in the Department of Mysteries. Harry would immediately tell Ron and Hermione that they had to go after him. Hermione would say that they had to make sure, to confirm with Dumbledore, but Harry would refuse to go to Dumbledore, that he wasn't supposed to be having these dreams in the first place, and even if he was, Dumbledore clearly didn't trust him. Hermione would of course disagree, but would suggest they at least check in Umbridge's fire. And after picking up Ginny, Luna, and Neville, the plan would fail just the same, as all Harry had to show with it was Kreacher telling him Sirius wasn't there. But this time, their escape wouldn't come from Hermione. It would come from Dumbledore, who would swiftly enter as Umbridge questioned Harry, and when she tried to force him out, Dumbledore would be forced to break him out, stunning Umbridge and her Inquisitors. Now free, Harry would insist that they had to leave to save Sirius, but Dumbledore would not allow this. He would send Fawkes to confirm Sirius was safe, but this wouldn't be good enough for Harry, who would continue to argue with him. Dumbledore had been struggling with his decision to withdraw from Harry's life so much this year, and this was the hardest time to do it. He had to protect the information, but he had to do something too. And he would tell Harry that Voldemort was after something in the Department of Mysteries that only he and Harry could get. Of course, Harry would demand to know what it was and would be angry that Dumbledore couldn't tell him, but it would get so much worse as Voldemort would take over Harry and threaten to kill him if they didn't bring the prophecy to him. Dumbledore would agree, but would have a plan up his sleeve. He would bring Harry, but he would also bring the Order of the Phoenix, and when the battle broke out, Dumbledore would have Harry smash the prophecy, telling him that he would learn it when he could block Voldemort from his mind. With the prophecy destroyed, Voldemort would again take over Harry's mind, threatening to kill him, but this time Harry was ready for it. He thought of Ron and Hermione. He thought of Sirius. Harry was ready to die, to save his friends. And at that moment, the pain was gone. Voldemort was no longer able to withstand being in contact with Harry's soul, but he had a bigger problem. Fudge saw him. He could no longer deny that Voldemort was back. Some of the Death Eaters would escape, though, but not all of them could, and they would be arrested and sent to Azkaban, with one big change. Sirius would survive. The events of Half-Blood Prince would play out similarly, though Harry would not inherit Grimmauld Place as the cost of having his godfather alive, a trade I think that he'd be pretty happy with. But Dumbledore would still spend the year teaching him about Voldemort, as Voldemort would seek to punish Lucius by having Draco try, and presumably fail, to kill Dumbledore. And the year would still end with Snape killing Dumbledore, as Harry would now have to hunt the rest of the Horcruxes, with only Ron and Hermione for help, though he would be tempted to tell Sirius, to ask for his help, but he gave Dumbledore his word, so he wouldn't. Then we would get to the Battle of the Seven Potters, which would still happen with Snape using Mundungus to get that to be the plan, but there would be one change. Sirius would be there in Mundungus's place, so they could have someone more reliable. The battle would go more successfully for our heroes this time, though, aside from George's holiness, as Voldemort would go after Moody first, but Sirius was ready and would sooner die than run. Moody and Sirius would be able to preoccupy Voldemort just long enough to protect each other until Voldemort would learn that he was going after the wrong Potter, and Harry would once again be saved by the Golden Flames. But Moody and Sirius's survivals wouldn't change what needed to happen. Harry, Ron, and Hermione would leave the burrow after the Ministry fell, and would have nowhere to go besides Grimmauld Place. Sirius would have moved out after Dumbledore's death as a safety precaution, though everybody knew that he wanted the chance to fight Snape, and he had taken Kreacher with him for the safety of the Order, but eventually he would check in to see if the three of them had made their way there, and that would be how they would get their hands on the locket. Sirius would call Kreacher to them, and the house elf would apparate on command, but would not want to give the locket over on Sirius's order, claiming that Regulus's order ruled over that, but Harry and Hermione would convince him that they were trying to finish the work Regulus had started, eventually succeeding in convincing Kreacher and softening Sirius's opinion of his brother and the house elf that had belonged to his family for so long. Sirius would continue to offer assistance and was getting increasingly annoyed that Harry wouldn't tell him what Dumbledore's mission for him was, especially as the Golden Trio isolated themselves to plan their break-in at the Ministry. Sirius would try to follow alongside to see what they were doing, but once they got into the Ministry, he had no way to safely follow. The break-in would go as it had, with Yaxley accidentally getting into Grimmauld Place, and Sirius having no way to find them once they were having to camp on the English countryside. The events would continue as they had before, as Ron would leave, Harry and Hermione would be attacked by Nagini, Ron would come back with the Sword of Gryffindor, and they would break in at Gringotts before going to Hogwarts to destroy the final Horcrux. And the Battle of Hogwarts would play out similarly, as Sirius would be fighting with Lupin, as the two of them and Tonks had to fight off Antonin Dolohov and Bellatrix Lestrange. With Sirius's presence enough to push them back, they would all survive. Many would still die, though, and Harry had a way to stop it. And with his parents comforting him through the Resurrection Stone, he faced Voldemort, ready to die, only to come back and finish off Voldemort for good. And all was well. And that's my story for today. Let me know in the comments what you think, or if you have any ideas for any other Harry Potter or Star Wars what-ifs. And if you've stuck around this long, you've probably enjoyed the video a little bit, so please drop a like, subscribe if you want more like this, and I'll see you next time on STV.